The alien queen noticed my silence. What followed was unforgettable. Commander Jace Alvarado stood still in the center of the grand hall, the weight of his decision pressing on his shoulders. Around him, the alien queen, Ivrithes, gazed down from her towering throne, her golden eyes glinting with unspoken power. The entire room held its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Jace didn't move, didn't speak, and most importantly, he didn't flinch. The Drexens, an alien race known for their ruthless war tactics and imposing presence, had never been inclined toward diplomacy. They were a proud species, and their queen was their fiercest symbol of strength. The mission Jace had been sent on was critical. The entire future of humanity depended on his ability to negotiate peace with the Drexens, a race who saw humans as little more than pests. But today, Jace was not going to play the role of the frightened ambassador. Today, he would show them a new way, a human way of power, not through force, but through something far more subtle. Ivrithes had ordered the meeting. She wanted to see the human diplomats face to face, to gauge them, perhaps even to toy with them. For the Drexens, meeting the enemy was part of their ritualistic display of superiority. They expected humans to cower, to beg for peace. But Jace wasn't following the script. Silence had fallen, so deep it felt like it could swallow them whole. Jace stood motionless, his posture straight but relaxed, his eyes focused directly on the queen's towering figure. His thoughts were calm, controlled, and his mind shielded from the telepathic probing that the Drexens were famous for. Jace had been trained for this, his skills in mental discipline and communication honed over years of quiet study. He wasn't just a negotiator. He was a master of reading the smallest gestures, of conveying meaning with nothing more than a glance. Ivrithes seemed unbothered by the silence at first. Her many eyes, hidden under the ornate helmet that adorned her regal face, moved over him, trying to detect a hint of fear or uncertainty. She expected it. It was the first thing the Drexens would detect in their enemies, the tremble of the body, the nervous shift of a glance. They thrived on these things, but Jace offered none of them. He simply remained unmoving, offering her nothing to read, nothing to exploit. The queen's posture stiffened slightly. The air grew tense, her unspoken questions flooding the room like waves. What was this human thinking? Why was he silent? Was it out of fear, or was it some kind of trick? She couldn't tell. The queen's immense psychic power surged in her mind, but it met an unexpected wall. She tried to penetrate his thoughts, to read his intentions, but Jace's mind was a fortress. Every telepathic probe bounced off his mental shields, unable to even graze the surface of his consciousness. Ivrithes took a step forward. She leaned down slightly from her throne, studying him more closely. The others in the room, her advisors and the human delegates, watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. What was going on? Were they witnessing the first true display of human defiance? Jace didn't acknowledge the queen's challenge. He didn't even flinch as her probing thoughts grew sharper. In Drexen culture, silence from an enemy was almost an insult. It was seen as a refusal to engage, a denial of the Drexen right to dominate. Ivrithes' golden eyes narrowed. She would not let this human go without a response. "You do not fear us?" she asked in a low, rumbling voice, her words speaking directly into Jace's mind. Her psychic presence wrapped around him like a thick, suffocating fog, demanding an answer. Jace took a slow breath, his focus unwavering. He did not answer. Instead, he remained still, his silence more powerful than any words he could speak. Ivrithes' patience began to wane. She spoke again, this time her voice more commanding. "Why do you refuse to speak?" The words felt like a demand, and yet Jace only stood in response, calm and quiet. His eyes locked with hers, but no words passed between them. The room was thick with tension now, and the human delegation could only watch, helpless. They knew their fate rested in Jace's hands, but they could not understand why he would choose to remain silent in the face of such an important negotiation. Was this part of some larger strategy, or had Jace simply given up on diplomacy? The silence stretched on, and it was then that the queen felt a spark of something unexpected, a flicker of doubt. She was a being of immense power, with a mind capable of bending even the most resilient minds to her will. Yet this human, this simple commander, remained unmoved. No fear, no attempt at negotiation. Only silence. Ivrithes took another step closer, her large figure looming over Jace. The room was dead quiet now, and even the Drexen advisors, normally so sure of their queen's absolute dominance, exchanged nervous glances. What was going to happen? Was this human truly impervious to the queen's influence? With a soft sigh, the queen pulled back. For the first time in her life, she felt a deep respect for someone who had not bowed before her power. She had expected submission, and yet Jace had shown her a different kind of strength. He had shown her that silence could be as powerful as any weapon. Still, Ivrithes wasn't ready to give in completely. She would make him speak, would force him to break under the pressure. This was a battle, after all, and she would win it even if it meant pushing further. But Jace remained steady, his silence becoming not an absence but a presence. His very stillness began to fill the room with an undeniable weight. No words were needed. The message was clear. The humans were not to be underestimated. They could stand tall even without the fear the Drexens expected. "Let the game begin," thought Jace, as he stood silently before the queen. His silence had already shifted the power dynamic in the room. What would follow was nothing short of unforgettable. Jace stood quietly, unmoved, while Queen Ivrithes' golden eyes studied him closely. The queen had not expected this. Humans, even their strongest soldiers, were usually quick to speak, quick to react, quick to show weakness. Yet Jace, this human diplomat, had not shown any of those signs. His silence was not just a refusal to speak. It was a message. The queen's thoughts pressed against his mind like heavy, unrelenting waves, but Jace had built his mental shields long before this moment. His training in mental discipline, taught to him by humanity's greatest telepathic experts, allowed him to block out the queen's attempts. But the queen was not so easily deterred. "You have nothing to say?" she asked again, her voice now carrying more force. The words echoed inside Jace's mind, but he remained silent. His eyes never left hers, unwavering, steadfast. Ivrithes' gaze turned cold, and for a brief moment she wondered if she had miscalculated. She was the queen of the Drexens, a species that had conquered dozens of planets. Her telepathic abilities were unmatched, and she had brought entire species to their knees without lifting a finger. Yet this human was different. His mind remained closed off to her, and his silence was a power she did not understand. The room was tense with an energy that seemed to hum in the air. The Drexens around her watched, silent and still, unsure of what to make of the human diplomat. Jace's delegation was equally confused. They had expected this meeting to be a battle of words, not a contest of wills, but Jace was not playing by the rules they knew. Ivrithes shifted on her throne, her gaze never leaving Jace. Her many eyes, all adorned with ornate markings, narrowed as she studied his stillness. There was something unsettling about it. Most enemies would try to impress her with power, with fear, with words, but Jace had offered none of these. His silence was an act of defiance, one that made her question the human resolve. "You refuse to speak, human," the queen spoke again, her voice now more a low rumble, commanding and full of authority. Her telepathic pressure intensified, a deep, almost suffocating presence that reached into Jace's mind. But still, he resisted. Jace could feel the weight of the queen's thoughts pressing against him, but he didn't let it show. He had trained for this. Silence for him was a choice, a strategic move. He would not bend, not now, not ever. His silence was his answer, and it would remain his answer. The queen's patience was wearing thin. She leaned forward, her figure towering over him. Her gaze, piercing and sharp, seemed to cut through the very air between them. It was clear that she was waiting for him to speak, to react in some way. But Jace didn't budge. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her. "Do you understand what I am doing?" Ivrithes asked, her tone less a question and more a challenge. "Do you understand that I am allowing you to speak?" Jace's response was as simple as it was powerful. He didn't respond at all. The queen's eyes flashed with frustration, but there was a part of her, deep within the recesses of her mind, that began to respect the human. His silence was not born of fear. It was born of strength. The queen withdrew slightly, leaning back into her throne. The room grew quieter still, the weight of the moment sinking in. For the first time in her long life, Ivrithes found herself in a situation where words were not enough. She had to face the reality that Jace was not afraid of her, nor was he trying to win her favor with praise or flattery. His silence was a challenge, and it demanded her attention. Jace was aware of the growing tension, but he kept his face calm. He had not expected this to be easy. He knew the Drexens respected power, dominance, and fear. He knew that in their world, words often carried weight beyond their meaning. But he had learned something over the years. Sometimes, the absence of words was the most powerful statement of all. The Queen's telepathic presence remained, but Jace had grown skilled at ignoring it. He could feel her trying to break through, trying to find weakness. But there was none. His mental walls were strong, built from years of experience. Jace had studied the Drexens, understood their ways, and knew that his silence could be a weapon just as powerful as any bomb or missile. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ivrithes spoke once more, this time without the pressure of her telepathic influence. "You are different from the others," she said. Her voice was softer now, not as commanding as before. "Tell me, human, why do you remain silent?" "Why not speak your mind?" Jace paused, considering the question. He knew that this was a turning point, a moment that could change the course of the conversation. He had the Queen's attention now, and the silence had done its job. But he also knew that the real challenge was yet to come. Finally, he broke his silence, not with words but with a simple gesture. He raised his hand slightly, his palm open. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Ivrithes it carried a powerful message. It was an invitation to understand, to connect, to communicate in a way the Queen had never considered. The Queen watched the gesture carefully. There was no arrogance in it, no sign of aggression. It was not a threat, it was an offering. Jace's silence had opened the door for something deeper, something more profound. He was not just a diplomat, he was a symbol of a different kind of strength. A strength that came from within. Ivrithes sat in silence, her many eyes locked onto Jace. The moment stretched on, and for the first time in her life she felt a spark of something she had never expected: curiosity. "You do not speak," she said, her voice now more thoughtful than before. "But you speak in ways I have not encountered before." Jace gave no answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, and it had already begun to change the Queen's mind. The room was silent once more, but this time the silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with potential. The battle of words had turned into a battle of wills, and Jace had won the first round. He had made a statement. That silence sometimes was the most powerful weapon of all. And as the Queen sat back, contemplating what had just happened, Jace knew that the battle was far from over. But he was ready. His silence would carry him through. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of something new. The silence in the room had shifted. No longer was it an uncomfortable void, filled with tension and uncertainty. Instead, it had become a powerful silence, thick with unspoken understanding. Jace Alvarado had done what no other human had managed to do before. He had captured the attention of the Drexen Queen, Ivrithes, without uttering a single word. It was clear now that the conversation had taken an unexpected turn, and the stakes were higher than ever. Ivrithes remained on her throne, her many eyes fixed on Jace. He had not given an inch, not even the smallest sign of fear or hesitation. He was still, unyielding, a pillar of calm in the face of the Drexen Queen's probing, her attempts to unravel his mind. She had expected him to be like the others, to speak, to beg, to seek favor, but Jace was not like the others. He had stood there in complete silence, making a statement with his actions that words never could. The Queen had expected to intimidate him with her power, to force him to speak, to bend to her will. But instead, she found herself intrigued by him. For the first time, she was not in control of the situation. The silence between them had become a battleground of its own, and the Queen was no longer sure of the rules. Jace's mind remained impenetrable to her telepathic touch, his thoughts guarded by an impenetrable shield. She tried again, pushing harder, but still, she couldn't breach his defenses. Each attempt to pierce his mind was met with an impenetrable wall. It was as if Jace's silence had become a fortress, protecting him from everything the Queen could throw at him. "Why do you remain silent, human?" Ivrithes asked again, her voice softer this time. There was no anger in her tone, no demand for submission. Instead, there was something else, a flicker of curiosity, of genuine interest. She had never encountered a human like this before. Jace did not respond. He simply stood there unmoving, his gaze locked with hers. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly, still studying him. There was something about him that defied her expectations, something that made her question everything she had known about humans. It was then that she realized that Jace had been speaking all along, not with words but with his actions, with his silence. He was not afraid of her. He was not seeking her approval. Instead, he was showing her something far more powerful, his unwavering strength of will. The queen had always believed that power came from domination, from the ability to control others, to break them down and force them to submit. But Jace had shown her that there was another kind of power, one that came from within, a power that could stand strong in the face of anything, even her own might. Jace remained still, as if waiting for something. He knew that his silence had shifted the dynamic of the meeting, but he also knew that the real challenge was yet to come. The queen had been intrigued, yes, but that didn't mean she was ready to give up her position of dominance. She had to be convinced that humanity had something to offer, something worth respecting, and that Jace knew would require more than just silence. After a long pause, the queen leaned forward slightly. Her voice was quieter this time, more contemplative. "You are different," she said almost to herself. "You are not like the others." Jace's gaze remained steady, unblinking. He did not react to her words, but he could feel the change in the room. The queen was no longer trying to force him into submission. She was no longer looking for fear or obedience. She was searching for something more. "I see now," the queen continued, her voice still soft. "You are not afraid of me, are you?" It was not a question. It was a statement, one that carried a weight of realization. Jace's silence was not a sign of submission, nor was it a sign of fear. It was something else entirely. It was strength. Jace's lips barely parted, but there was no answer. His silence was a response in itself, and it carried more weight than any words could. The queen's eyes flickered, something akin to respect crossing her features. Ivrithes sat back in her throne, her gaze still fixed on Jace. She had never encountered a human like this before, one who could stand in the presence of a queen and remain unshaken, undaunted by her power. There was something about him, something that defied the very nature of her understanding of strength and dominance. The room had gone quiet once again, but this time it wasn't the heavy, uncomfortable silence it had been before. It was a different kind of quiet, one filled with potential, with possibility. Jace had done something few others could do. He had not just shown strength. He had shown humanity's true power, the ability to endure, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to remain calm in the face of overwhelming force. Ivrithes, for the first time, found herself in a position where she was unsure of how to proceed. The rules of power, the rules of domination she had lived by for so long, did not apply here. Jace was not playing by them, and she wasn't sure if she even understood the game he was playing. For the first time, she found herself questioning her assumptions about humans. She had always viewed them as weak, as fragile creatures, easily crushed under the weight of superior power. But Jace had shown her that there was something more to them, something that made them dangerous in a way she had never anticipated. The queen was still for a moment, her mind whirling with new thoughts, new ideas. Perhaps, just perhaps, humanity was not as weak as she had thought. Perhaps they had something to offer after all. "Tell me, human," Ivrithes said, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "What do you want from me?" Her question was simple, but it carried a weight of significance. She wasn't asking for a request, nor was she asking for submission. She was asking what Jace truly wanted from her from this moment. Jace paused, and for the first time he did speak. His voice was calm, steady, and firm, much like his presence. "I want peace," he said simply. The queen blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of his response. Peace, was that all? She had expected a more elaborate answer, a more complex request, but this was what he wanted, peace. "Is that all?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "You come to me face to face with the Queen of the Drexens, and all you ask for is peace," Jace nodded. "Peace. For my people, for your people, for all who have suffered." Ivrithes sat back in her throne, her expression unreadable. She had thought she understood the humans, but Jace had shown her something entirely different. A part of her admired his resolve, his ability to stand firm in his convictions, to ask for something so simple and yet so powerful. She had underestimated humanity, and now she wasn't sure if she had the power to crush them as easily as she thought. The room was still, and the tension that had once filled the air had begun to dissipate, replaced by something else. Something more uncertain, more open. Jace had won the first battle, but the war, he knew, was far from over. He had made his statement. Now the real negotiations were about to begin. Jace felt the weight of the room shift. The moment he had been waiting for was now here, and yet there was no sense of victory. He knew that what had happened so far was only the beginning. The queen, Ivrithes, had softened. her posture no longer as threatening as it had been when they first entered the grand hall. The power dynamic had shifted, but the negotiation was far from over. The queen's respect was something, yes, but it had not yet led to any concrete agreement. Ivrithes studied him for a long moment, her eyes flickering between admiration and suspicion. Humans were unpredictable, and for the first time in her long life she felt uncertain. What was it about this human that had managed to reach her in ways that none of her own kind ever had? She had spent centuries dealing with adversaries, and never had anyone remained so calm, so unbroken under her scrutiny. It made her wonder if perhaps her people had misjudged humans entirely. The silence between them stretched, but this time it was not uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with the weight of what had been said and what had not been. Jace was still. His eyes met hers, unwavering. He had said what he needed to say, peace was what he wanted. Nothing more. No hidden agendas, no power plays, just peace. The queen, however, could not accept such simplicity. She had to test him. She had to see if there was something more beneath the surface. "You ask for peace," Ivrithes spoke, her voice calm but with an edge to it. "But what are you willing to give for it?" Jace didn't flinch. This was the moment where his silence could either work for him or betray him. He had expected this question. It was always the next step in negotiations like these. And it was not a question of compromise. It was a question of humanity's willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. "I'm not asking for anything in return," he replied, his voice steady and clear. "I am offering peace because it is the right thing to do, not because of any gain or advantage, but because we are both better off without this war." There was no arrogance in his voice, no false humility. It was simply the truth. For Jace, peace wasn't about winning or losing. It was about stopping the endless suffering and finding a way forward that benefited both sides. Ivrithes narrowed her eyes, her mind racing. Humans were strange. They seemed to be driven by ideals and values that were foreign to her people. The Drexens had long since abandoned any notion of kindness or fairness. They thrived on power, on conquest, on dominance. And yet here was this human offering peace without any expectation of reward. What did it mean? What kind of leader would willingly forego power? "What do you believe peace will bring?" the queen asked, her voice softer now, more curious than it had been before. Jace took a breath, considering the queen's question. "Peace will bring an end to the suffering. It will allow both our peoples to rebuild, to grow, and to move forward. It will allow us to find new ways to work together, to learn from each other. There is nothing to gain from continued war, only destruction." Ivrithes studied him for a long moment. She was not used to hearing such words from anyone, let alone a human. Her kind had always been about survival, about strength, about maintaining their place at the top of the hierarchy. The idea of working together, of compromising, was something she had never truly understood. She had thought the universe worked by the law of the strongest, and yet here was a human asking for something entirely different. "You ask for trust," Ivrithes finally said. "You expect me to trust you and for my people to trust yours. You expect us to lay down our weapons, to stop our conquest, and to believe that you are sincere in this request." "Yes," Jace answered simply. "Trust is the first step." The queen looked at him, searching his face for any hint of deception. But there was nothing. His expression was calm, sincere. It was almost unsettling to her. How could a species as young as humanity possess such a sense of clarity, such an understanding of what was needed? There was a long silence, and for a moment Jace wondered if he had said too much. He knew how hard it was to build trust, especially after so many years of conflict. He also knew that the queen could still decide to reject everything he had offered. There was no guarantee, no certainty. But he had said his piece, and now it was up to her. Finally, the queen spoke again, her voice carrying a weight that only someone in her position could carry. "If I agree to this," she began, "there will be no turning back. The Drexens will not forget this. We will not forget the humans who came to us in peace, and we will not forget the humans who chose to defy us." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "But I will admit this, your courage is unlike anything I have seen before." Jace nodded slowly, accepting her words without pride. This was not about courage, this was about survival. Both their peoples had lost too much already. What was the point of more fighting, more death, more destruction? "You have my word," Jace said, his voice steady and firm. "I offer peace because it is the only way forward. If we continue to fight, we will both be destroyed. I believe that with every part of me." For the first time, Ivrithes appeared to soften. Her eyes flickered with something that might have been respect, or perhaps it was recognition. The humans, it seemed, were not so easily destroyed after all. They had found a way to survive, to thrive even in a galaxy that was constantly at war. And now they were asking for peace. The queen leaned back in her throne, her mind still whirling with thoughts. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was not a simple matter. Agreeing to peace would change everything. It would shift the balance of power in the galaxy. It would redefine her people's place in the universe. But there was another part of her, the part that had watched so many wars, so many conflicts, wondering if perhaps Jace was right. Maybe there was something to this idea of peace. Maybe it was time for the Drexens to try something different. Ivrithes closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more contemplative. "I will agree to your terms," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of war. "But know this, human, peace comes with a price. My people will never forget the history that has shaped us. We will not forget the battles we fought, the lives lost. Peace must be earned, and it will not be easy." Jace nodded again, his heart steady. He knew peace would not come quickly or easily. But this was the first step, the hardest one, and he had no doubt that it was worth fighting for. "Then we will earn it," Jace said quietly. "Together." The queen regarded him for a moment, her gaze intense but no longer filled with suspicion or distrust. Instead, it held something more, something that resembled hope. "Very well," she said at last. "We will try your way, human, but be warned, if you betray this trust, the consequences will be far worse than anything you can imagine." Jace bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "I will not betray it." And with that, the first steps toward peace were taken. The queen had agreed, not because she had been forced, but because she had seen something in Jace's eyes. She had seen a humanity that she had never expected, one that could stand in the face of overwhelming power and still ask for peace. The room was quiet, but for the first time, the silence was no longer filled with tension. It was filled with the possibility of change. And that, Jace knew, was a beginning. The decision had been made. For the first time in the history of their conflict, the Drexens and humans were not at war. Peace was now on the table, and the weight of that realization was heavy in the air. It wasn't just the end of a war. It was the beginning of something new, something neither side had expected. Jace Alvarado stood still in the center of the room, still as calm as ever, but inside, his mind was alive with 1,000 questions. Was this peace truly possible? Would the Queen's agreement hold, or would the Drexens find a way to turn on them? He had done his part. He had laid the foundation for peace with his silence, his strength, and his words. Now it was up to both sides to uphold it. Ivrithes sat back in her throne, her eyes still fixed on Jace. The Queen's posture was more relaxed now, but there was no mistaking the weight of the decision she had just made. For a leader like her, the act of agreeing to peace was not just a political move. It was a deeply personal one. The Drexens had never known peace, never wanted it. They had ruled through fear, through violence, and through the unyielding belief that only the strongest could survive. But Jace's calm and determination had broken through all that. And now the future was uncertain. The Queen did not speak immediately. The room was filled with a quiet anticipation, the kind that happens when something monumental has just occurred, but the reality of it hasn't fully sunk in. Jace waited patiently, his thoughts focused but his emotions hidden behind the same mask of calm he had worn throughout the negotiation. "You have done the impossible, human," Ivrithes finally said, her voice carrying a note of reluctant respect. "You have made me reconsider everything I believed about your kind." Jace didn't smile, didn't respond with words. He simply nodded. This was not a victory, not yet, not until the peace held. For the first time, the Queen leaned forward in her seat, her eyes narrowing with renewed focus. "But you must understand something, human. Peace is not just a matter of words. It is a matter of action. We will not simply stop fighting because you ask us to. There are factions within my empire, warriors who will never accept this treaty. Some of my people will fight until the very end." Jace remained still, his mind processing her words. He had expected this. Peace was never easy, especially not after years of hatred and bloodshed. He knew that this agreement would not be embraced by all Drexens and that there would be resistance. But he also knew that the first step had been taken. That was the hardest part. "I understand," Jace said simply. "Peace is not just about making a promise." It's about showing that the alternative, war, is far worse for everyone involved. Ivrithes gave him a sharp look. You speak with confidence, human, but it will take more than words to prove that peace is possible. I know, Jace replied. It will take years. Generations, perhaps. But if we want to ensure that this peace lasts, we have to start with small steps. Both sides will have to work for it to earn each other's trust. And we must not let the extremists on either side destroy what we've begun. The queen was quiet for a moment, her golden eyes studying him. Perhaps, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. But do not think it will be easy. My people are not accustomed to peace, and the humans who are here are not all like you. Some will want nothing but revenge for the battles they've fought. Some will want to continue the fight to crush us completely. Jace didn't flinch. He had already anticipated this challenge. It was not just about the Drexens, it was about the humans, too. There were those on both sides who believed in victory at any cost, those who saw peace as weakness. Peace will require all of us to change, he said quietly. But I believe it is possible. For the first time, the queen's lips curled into a small smile, a rare and almost imperceptible gesture. You are a strange human, Jace Alvarado. You speak of peace as if it is within your grasp. Perhaps it is. She paused, her eyes softening slightly. But if you are wrong, if this peace fails, Jace met her gaze without hesitation, then I will be the first to take responsibility for it. The queen studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing his words, then nodded slightly. You have earned my respect, human. I cannot deny that, but you are asking us to do something we have never done before. Trust in you, trust in your people, trust in peace. I am asking for the same thing of you, Jace replied. There was a long silence between them. Outside the grand hall, the sounds of the Drexen Empire, its soldiers, its people, its machinery, continued as they always had. But inside, something had changed. The war that had raged for so long was no longer the only reality. Peace was now a possibility. And that in itself was a victory. Ivrithes stood slowly from her throne, her tall, imposing figure casting a shadow over Jace. For a moment, she seemed to tower over him, the weight of her power still present. But there was something different in her gaze now. Something that was not entirely filled with threat. Very well, she said, her voice carrying the authority of a queen. Let this peace begin. But know this, human, if you betray my trust, if you fail to live up to your words, there will be no mercy. There will be no second chance. I will not fail, Jace answered, his voice firm. I will make sure of it. The queen gave him a sharp look and then turned, her long robes flowing behind her. We will see, she said, her voice fading as she walked away. We will see. As Jace watched her leave, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The peace treaty was not the end of the journey, it was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, many challenges, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. The impossible had been achieved, the war was over, and now humanity and the Drexens would have to find a way to live together. But peace, he knew, was not just a choice, it was a responsibility. And that responsibility would fall on his shoulders, and the shoulders of every human and Drexen who believed in it. The door to the grand hall closed behind the queen, and the room grew silent again. But this time, the silence was filled with a sense of possibility. Jace knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, there was a chance for a future without war.